So, recent developments, current events, there's not much to say good about anything that's happening right now. Obviously, very tragic situation the country is in. But one interesting side effect of what's happening here is what appears to be increasing awareness on the part of Americans and the media about the Constitution. Two, claims by the president in particular have raised constitutional issues. First, there's sort of the narrower assertion by the president that it is the president's decision when and whether to open the economy, as people are saying. The second thing that the president said, and much more broad, was that when somebody's the president of the United States, their authority is total, what he called total. Total, of course, being the root word of totalitarian. I always tell students that one of the overriding principles of constitutional law is that whatever government you're talking about is supposed to stay in its lane, right? Stay in your lane. Our government is layered and compartmentalized. And everybody's heard about this term, checks and balances, right? The reason our government is layered and compartmentalized would be so that no part of government becomes all-powerful or too powerful. Obviously, a president claiming that his authority is total, whatever that means, is probably at risk of getting out of his lane. So let's talk about a couple of the general principles underlying constitutional law. Now, when we talk about a system of checks and balances, the way I put this is that there is tension built into the Constitution, right? And that tension is both vertical and horizontal. We'll talk first about vertical tension, which is the arrow pointing up and down, obviously. There's tension between the federal government and the states, right? That's built into the Constitution, specifically under the 10th Amendment, right? Where there's a federal government which has enumerated powers and there are states which have more general power. So the question often in a constitutional case is often which level of government, right? These are levels. Federal government, which is the national government, or the state/local government, right? Which level of government is supposed to be doing what? Again, think about it this way. Each one is supposed to stay in its lane. The federal government is only supposed to be doing what the federal government is allowed to do under the Constitution, and states are only supposed to be doing what states are allowed to do under the Constitution. We also have this horizontal tension, and that exists at the federal level, right? When we are looking at tension among or between the three branches, right? There are three branches of the federal government. So each one of those branches is also supposed to stay in its lane, right? We have the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. I'll slide on that in a minute. And each one of those is supposed to stay in its lane. So we'll talk here about what each one of those is supposed to do. What is the federal government supposed to be doing? What are states supposed to be doing? When it comes to the federal government, which branch is supposed to be doing what? Again, federalism problems run this way. This is called a federalism problem. When you have tension between the federal national government and state government as to who's supposed to do what, that is called a federalism problem. Here's essentially how it works. The federal government under the Constitution has what we call enumerated powers, right? The powers that are listed. Most of those powers are listed in Article 1, Section 8, which is the part of the Constitution that tells Congress what it's allowed to do. Congress is not allowed to do whatever it wants. Congress has limited things that it's allowed to regulate. It's allowed to lay and collect taxes, unfortunately, spend for the general welfare, borrow on the credit of the United States. It's allowed to coin money. It's allowed to raise armies and navies and declare war. It's allowed to build post roads, as the Constitution says, right? It's allowed to make rules about copyright, bankruptcy, and immigration and naturalization, right? There's an actual list. Here are the things, the list of things that you, the national government, right, through Congress, the lawmaking branch, what you're allowed to do. So we talk about the federal government having limited enumerated powers. State governments, on the other hand, under the 10th Amendment, have some of the reserved power, right, that is not given to the federal government. The 10th Amendment says that any power not given to the federal government is reserved to the states or to the people. A lot of people lop off that last part, right? Or the people means that there is some jurisdiction over life that belongs neither to a state nor to the federal government, but only to individual people. One more thing before we move on. The most important power Congress has is the power to regulate interstate commerce, right? and that, again, is federal level power. Interstate commerce, the authority to regulate interstate commerce is very broad, right? It's been pretty broadly interpreted, so Congress can do a lot pursuant to that power. Now, separation of powers problems run this way, right? Horizontal. Here we're talking about conflicts among the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. So those are the three branches of the federal government. And what are they supposed to be doing? The legislative branch makes law, right? They're the one that's the one with the dome. I joke with students about this, right? You look, which branch is supposed to be doing this? The one with the dome, right? I mean, that's Congress. Congress is the lawmaking branch, so Congress is supposed to be doing that. Congress is not supposed to be executing the law or interpreting the law, right? Congress is supposed to be making the law, and it does that by enacting statutes. The president, the executive branch, under Article 2, is supposed to be executing and enforcing the law. So you see a link here between what the president is doing and what Congress has authorized the president to do, because the president's job is to carry out, right, the laws passed by Congress. The president is also supposed to enforce and execute the Constitution, right, and honor the Constitution and the treaties of the United States. The Supremacy Clause of the Constitution says that the Constitution, statutes passed by Congress, and treaties, right, are the supreme law of the land, and the president's job is to execute the law. So the president's not supposed to be making law, and the president's not supposed to be interpreting the law. The president's supposed to be executing the law. The judicial branch, on the other hand, is the branch that interprets and applies the law in cases, right, to resolve cases. So the judicial branch is not supposed to be making law or executing the law. The judicial branch is supposed to be applying the law, right, interpreting what it means and applying it on a case-by-case basis. And those are the functions of the three branches of the federal government. So we have a question here, right? When the president says, I can close the economy, I can open the economy, I have ultimate authority, my authority is total. Is the president making law, or is the president executing law, right? When the president claims for himself the unilateral authority to set domestic policy. Arguably and likely what the president is saying there is that I get to make law, right? And that would violate constitutional principles. If the current president has any questions about that, it's too bad he can't have a conversation with Harry Truman, who thought that he had the unilateral authority during the Korean War to seize steel mills where there was union strife or labor strife going on, and threatened strike right during a war when we needed steel. Harry Truman decided to seize the steel mills and take them under the control of the federal government. The Supreme Court had to remind Harry Truman that he does not get to set domestic policy without Congress, and that he's only the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. He's not the commander-in-chief of us, right? He's not the commander-in-chief of civilians in the United States. So here's the structure of government generally. Okay, you see layered and compartmentalized, right, government. We have a national government that has three branches, and then we have the states, and the question is, who's supposed to be doing what? Now, the president has pulled off what I call a double whammy, because he, in claiming power for himself to shut down the economy, open the economy, right, decide who's quarantined and who's not, and in the assertion that his authority is total. First of all, he has identified the wrong branch of the federal government, right, to be doing these things. It is the legislative branch, it is Congress, that's the lawmaker, and Congress is the one that sets national policy. Now, interestingly, there is a federal law, a statute in play here, and it is, and thank you for a friend on Facebook for asking me about this and sending me the link to it. It is 42 U.S.C. 264, which authorizes the Secretary of Health and Human Services to take measures to prevent the entry and spread of communicable disease, right? And of course, the HHS Secretary works for the President, so this is an authorization for the executive branch. But you'll note that what the executive branch is authorized to do under the statute is to stop people from entering the United States if they have a contagious disease, or traveling among the states, right, if they have contagious diseases. Why is Congress's law limited to that, and therefore the President's authority to execute the law limited to that? Well, because Congress has only enumerated powers, and one of those powers is the power to regulate commerce, right, among the nations and among the states. So Congress does not have the general authority to regulate for the health, safety, and general welfare of the population. that belongs to states. More on that in a minute. So when you look at Congress's statute here, they were obviously mindful of that, right? People entering the country or traveling among the states, right? That is what Congress has the authority to do. And when Congress, when the executive is enforcing that law, certainly it can go ahead and you see here, right, prevent entry into the United States, right, authorize measures to prevent the spread of communicable diseases between the states, accept local and state assistance, right, and offer assistance. Now, what is the state, local, and tribal authority? What are they supposed to be doing? They are the ones who enforce isolation and quarantine within their borders, right, because the states, again, have something called the police power. So let's get into that. So number one, the president here identified the wrong branch, right, as setting domestic policy, right? When it comes to lifting quarantines, imposing quarantines, it's Congress that authorizes that. It is not the president. The president also likely has the wrong level of government. So I've been talking about this thing called the police power. The police power is reserved to the states under the 10th Amendment, right? Courts have always held that that's what it's called. It's called police power. The police power is the general authority of a government to regulate for the health, safety, and general welfare of the population. Quarantine laws and healthcare laws are laws that fall under that police power, right? Now, why can Congress also pass laws that affect healthcare? Well, it can do that if the law that it passes, right, is interpreted by the courts, right, as being a regulation of interstate commerce, a regulation of the national economy. But your classic run-of-the-mill health and safety measures, right, and measures taken for the general welfare of the population, the federal government does not have the power to do that. Believe it or not, it does not have the power to do that. States have the power to do that. So when the president suggests that he's authorizing governors or state legislatures, right, or states in general, to do what they already have the power to do, he's kind of whistling into the wind there. The president doesn't have to authorize states, right, to exercise their police power. The Constitution authorizes states to exercise their police power, and the president cannot stop a state from doing that. So we have wrong branch, wrong state. Now, there's also a role, arguably, for the judiciary in all of this, because sometimes you have lawsuits, right, as to are states supposed to be doing it, or is the federal government supposed to be doing it? If the federal government's supposed to be doing it, which branch is supposed to be doing it? Well, those questions can wind up in court. Those are legal, constitutional questions. So there's also a role for the judiciary in all this. So we see here the legislative branch has a role, right, in terms of setting national policy. If they're going to impose a national quarantine as a regulation of interstate commerce, arguably they might be able to do that, but they haven't done it, right? All they've done is pass a law saying you can stop people from entering or from traveling, right, among the states. So the legislative branch has a role, states have a role because they have the police power, the judiciary has a role, a limited role simply in resolving disputes. When you look at the one component of our government that is not free to act in a way that is obvious, right, under these circumstances, except to enforce Congress's laws, that would be the executive. So again, Congress has the authority to regulate interstate commerce. So Congress can do that if it wants to. It can use that power to address this pandemic, right, and this national crisis. The president is not allowed to act outside, right, of the authority given to him by either the Constitution, which does not authorize the president, certainly does not authorize the president, right, to unilaterally enact police power, right? That's again wrong branch and level, right? So the legislative branch would have the power, Congress would have the power if it wanted to regulate under the Commerce Clause. States absolutely have the power, right, to impose quarantines and things like that. Now, if those quarantines implicate other constitutional issues like takings or fundamental rights issues or search and seizure without a warrant, there could be more involved in that. But generally speaking, states are the ones that have the power to regulate for health and safety. So one more time, the double whammy. The president, in saying that it was his choice alone when to lift quarantines, right, when to lift stay-at-home orders and restart the economy, and his assertion that he had absolute total power, those assertions are wrong on two levels. He's, first of all, identified the wrong branch of government as the lawmaking branch, and he's identified the wrong level of government as the level that has the general authority to regulate for health, safety, and general welfare. Hope that helps people's understanding of what's going on out there, and maybe help you engage in conversation with people who claim to honor and know the Constitution but have likely never read it. Thanks.